don't sound very excited.
All right. Well, welcome to the last day of the workshop. So first, a small announcement. We have, if you don't know, we have a lunch celebration on the second floor after the last morning talk. So it's a potluck in the sense that long-term visitors who've been here for a large portion of the semester either are bringing food or giving money. But if you're here just for the workshop, then you should just come. We should have plenty of food. Okay, so our first talk of the morning is by Konrad Kording. He is a neuroscience professor at the University of Pennsylvania. And on his lab website, it says that what he's currently interested in is understanding how the brain works using data. His research right now focuses very heavily on causality, but other research areas that he's spent a lot of time on include computational neuroscience, neural cryptography, and the dynamics of human memory. In addition, he has, well, maybe his blue hair is a bit of an indicator. He's interested in some sort of avant-garde topics as well. He spends a lot of time working on trying to promote open science and open access research. If you go to his Wikipedia, it talks about some controversial work he has on predicting your future H index based on your current H index. Although I read the paper and it wasn't that controversial, I think. And today, at least in its abstract, he said he would make malicious fun of out of distribution, but I'm not sure if that's actually what he's going to talk about. So Konrad, go ahead.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for having me there. I'm giving a completely different talk to what I was planning to give. I was planning to tell you about attention. I had even added a proof because I've been told that if there's no love in my talk, if I don't actually show you a proof. But I decided that the proof wasn't going to advance the debate that I think we should be having. Let's talk about generalization and let's talk about life. There's a mouse. I call that mouse Squeaky. This is the most important minute in Squeaky's life. Maybe Squeaky will get around the corner and live a long life full of like happy like family life and lots of children. Maybe Squeaky's gonna be food very soon. Why am I starting the talk like that? Because I believe it's universally the structure of important things in life, where you can say life has very few consequential events. Maybe there's a drought and we're gonna be really hungry. We want to do something about that. Maybe we get married to someone. Maybe we have kids. Maybe we get mauled by tigers. But all these things, so basically our whole life is essentially inconsequential with like we're doing kind of roughly the right thing. And then comes something really important. So from an evolutionary perspective, there's no doubt that for just about anyone, a tiny number of events in their life determine the outcomes of their life. Now, these events are fundamentally different than all other events that we have in our life. So the idea that we could think about generalization to being mauled by the tiger as a distribution shift that is sufficiently small that we can reject it and do TDS learning with it isn't going to be a very good approximation for that. So this is just to like start what I mean, like generalization is the only thing that matters. And in reality, our generalization isn't to things that are very similar. Our generalization is almost always to things that are very not similar to what we have, or at least in the cases where the generalization matters. Now, as long as we're just interpolating between stuff we've been doing all along, like we're good, like hello, like we've been doing machine learning, works just fine. That's how we think. Now, let's talk about the past and the future. Now, the past is really just the source of data because we can't change the past. Now, the past has already happened. And the future is different. What is D prime even in real life? Now, like, is that like what I see tomorrow? Well, it's going to be different because tomorrow I'm in Philadelphia. The idea that you could like get generalization bounds to Philadelphia by multiplying the distance between here and Philadelphia with the second derivative of like how life changes in some local neighborhood of Berkeley is just doesn't overly appeal. Out of distribution, now let me briefly, I don't have like a whole set of slides on it, But the whole notion of out of distribution is kind of like really weird if you think about it. You know, like if we are out of distribution, we can't say anything. And out of distribution isn't ever a thing. It's about the future. Now, like, it's not that we have like some magical, we have like some distribution and then we have a different distribution. No, the thing that makes the difference is that one is now and the other one is the future. One is Philadelphia and one is Berkeley. And there's structure in there. And by just treating it as if there's no more, no structure, I mean, like, the highlight of my talk is that at some level, the way the mathematical part of this community treats generalization is exactly the same way in which we've been treating support vector machines in 2005. We didn't need neural networks because like maximum margin, but in reality, we do need them because there's a rich set of structure in the real world that neural networks pick up on and that maximum margin like doesn't. And in the same way, there's like super rich structure about generalization that that you can't capture by like using simple statistics. So define generalization, like it's really easy. Do well on the new stuff. What's the new stuff? No, like there is something that converts what we know from the past into the future. That's all that we need to know. And that stuff has that relationship between the past and the future has structure, and we want to worry about structure. Now, let's put that into some math. They're popular. Now, if we had IID data, life could be so nice. Just go at all empirical risk minimization. No? Like the past risk, and I mean like if the IID risk here, you can write it down as a beautiful expected value of the loss associated with the stationary past probability distribution. But of course, in reality, animals don't perform in the past and neither do companies. What's different? Well, we have like the future distribution of stuff here. Now, this is like a traditional machine learning task. You know, like I have a distribution, I want to go to a different distribution. I have lots of evidence of that. You know, like the past of the past is somewhat similar as the past of the future, which is now. So there is something about the dynamics of the world that we can use for this. And there cannot be a simple, elegant solution. Let me give you examples. Now, like, now, if we had just like very short periods of time, I think we can say a lot of things that are relatively easy. You know, like should we expect? The world will have some maybe roughly linear drift into the future. Now, like I can see Konrad's moving to the right, probably Konrad's going to keep moving to the right. And this is something that we can build in, and that's actually relatively straightforward to be in. And then like you can also say there's some changes that will accumulate. You can look into the past. At some point of time, people stop. And I kind of know how often people stop, and therefore you can say, well, if Konrad's currently moving, chances are he's going to stop. And if you want to be structured, you can say, chances are he's going to stop before he hits the light of the projector. So there's rich structure there. Some components will also trend towards baseline values, not like regression to the mean. We find it all over the place. And so for short time differences, we can adapt existing models to just like deal with these like predictable changes that happen over time. And I should say in some cases, it might even be pretty trivial with current architectures. Now, like take current large language models. They currently do have a notion of time, which is like an LLM will basically look at text. That text implicitly gives away some information. Like, what do I know? I have a text, one paragraph, it talks about Donald Trump being president. I know that it's either from the future or that it's about 4 years ago, from 4 years to 8 years ago. But I know roughly where it is in time. But this is a very rough notion of that. In reality, every text that ever exists has kind of a time where it's coming from. And some aspects of language will decay very quickly. Maybe something about current political events. Some text will go, some information in text will go away very, very slowly. What do I know? Like People talk about physics. The way Newton wrote about physics is remarkably correlated to the way we would write about physics today. So there's different things that have different timescales. And in principle, models with basically no change can model that already. Now, let me talk, I promised you cognition. I used to be a movement scientist. Generalization is what we do. Let's talk about generalization in movement science. If we do movement science, I teach you something new. You move your hand, and every time you move your hand, I'm going to kick your hand, and your hand does this. And we keep doing this, and eventually you become straight. What's generalization? You do a different movement. Do you think you'll be kicked? Well, depends. Not like if you're in an experimental setup that looks like it has the causal capability to kick you, chances are you'll be kicking. You'll be kicked next time. So generalization is what we generally do. Briefly, why am I not in movement science right now? There's one paper that considerably helped me decide that I should leave movement science. It's one of my favorite papers. That's why I love talking about it. It has nothing to do with, or preciously little to do with what my talk is about. It's a paper called Does Science Advance One Funeral at a Time by Azulai. They looked at scientists middle-aged, like my age. They just got randomly killed. Like, think about killed by a bus, died by a heart attack, basically mid-aged people who just like leave the system. And there was a previous paper, it was called Superstar Extinction, that says it's really tragic if someone like me dies because like my collaborators do much worse and my department does much worse. This paper says, what if we look at the article, while the flow of articles by collaborators into affected fields decreased after the death of a star scientist, the flow of articles by non-collaborators increased markedly. This search and contributions from outsiders draws upon a different scientific corpus and is disproportionately likely to be highly cited. So people like me in motor control, I was like kind of like an important motor control person, just hold back the field because I enforce standards that are probably a really bad idea that prevent outsiders from entering my field and writing awesome papers that I can't even personally predict. Therefore, I feel I have to leave all the time. But you're going to hear about motor control because the movement science field, I think, has a lot to say about generalization. Let's talk about an example that I personally worked a fair bit on. You move a cup. I should have brought a coffee cup. This will do. Instead, you do this. The most simple thing that you'll ever do. And you observe that your hand moves slower than it would normally, then you planned it. You were like, okay, I want to like have the cup like that. It's a little bit slower. What's the reason for that? And the reason why I ask what the reason is, because I believe the reasons are what gives rise to how we should be generalizing. What could be the reason? Well, maybe there's more coffee in the cup. And because there's more coffee in the cup is heavier, and because it's heavier, the same motor command will move it slower. It could be that the cup itself is heavier. Like, what do you know? Like, I was expecting it to be a glass cup. It's a porcelain cup that has a different density. It could be that my muscles are weak. I worked out yesterday morning, maybe like I did too many biceps curls. It could be that I'm generally just weak because I didn't have enough coffee this morning. It could also be that I'm in a weird laboratory setting and that you can't trust cups in laboratories. But all of them are kind of ultimately, they lead us to a generalization problem because I just did the movement and I'm going to do the movement again. How should I do this? Now, this is really complicated. Now, let's be clear about it. Like, if there's more coffee, if that was the reason, well, like next step, it's going to be different. If it's a heavier cup, it's going to be shared between all movement that I do with any body. In fact, it's going to be shared between me and someone else drinking coffee from my cup, which they shouldn't be doing. If it's weak muscles, the generalization is different because weak muscles, usually they recover. At least tomorrow it's going to be better. But if it's something that just happened, then I should expect it to get better very quickly. And so on and so forth. Okay, let's talk about how concretely to think about it. So this is a model that described a whole bunch of data from the movement literature there. It's about only the part of the body. We've done a lot of experiments on different things, but only the parts of the body. You can say my muscle is affected by many timescales. There's some stuff that comes quick and goes quick, maybe fatigue. There's stuff that comes slowly, goes slower, goes away slower, nutrients maybe. There's stuff that is even slower, hypertrophy. I go lift, I'm gonna get stronger, weaker. There's things like diseases that maybe like affect me for many months. There's things like aging, like welcome to my life. And it's like very slow, and it like kind of comes slowly, goes away very slowly, or like doesn't. And then you have movement. This is super observable. And like I move, I make a mistake. This stuff here is not observable for me. My body is complicated. The food dependency of my muscles is complicated, so complicated that the nutrition scientists can't like give me good answers to just about anything. And this is hard to observe. This is observed. And let me tell you about the experiments. And like we do lots of experiments. That's what we do as movement scientists. We have a monkey. The monkey is supposed to move the eye from this target to this target. And because we're experimentalists, we do something really malicious. As soon as the eye starts moving, we take away this target and we move it here instead. Okay, saccadic gain adaptation experiments. Why are we doing that? We want a nice clean probe for which we can ask how it's then generalized into the future. And you can say it's equivalent to the muscles being too strong. In this case, the monkey is actually right, but like we're lying to it. We're basically, you're so strong, your eye muscles are so strong. Here's how the results of those experiments look like. And this is like, these are experiments by Robinson that I think are really cool. And they show some really bizarre generalization findings. So at first, the gain is large. The gain's gonna get smaller in these experiments now because like basically the monkey is making saccades that are too big according to its beliefs. So what they do is they do an experiment. They do like 1,000-ish saccades in one experiment. And then they take the monkey and put the monkey into a black room. Monkey sees nothing, black all night long. And then the monkey comes back the next day and look, it's making big mistakes again. And then it gets better over the monkey goes to the dark room, makes big mistakes again the next day. Same thing the next day, same thing the next day. It takes a really long time to go away. Why is this happening? That's bizarre. Like I give you training and you have absolutely zero gradient. Now the monkey is in the black room. There's no gradients. There's no error involved. It's black. And yet it goes up. What's that generalization that we have here? Why do we generalize like this? Well, let's build a little model. So we say we have a slow random walk, modeling some part of your body. We have a fast random walk, modeling some part of the body. Of course, in reality, we're going to assume a continuous set of different timescales. And we have the motor gain, which is the sum of all those. And then the idea is that the motor gain is like a model for the body. And then we see how that tells us how to generalize. Now, let's be clear that we know what we mean with generalize. We have experience from the past, and then we will have tests in the future with it. Now, we'll see with this model that this does exactly that if you spend like a night in a black room, it's going to go back up. Does anyone have an intuition on why that's going to happen? That's right. Yes, exactly. The fast timescales are going to go to the mean. We built a model, not like you know like what that model is, not like we have linear random walks, we add them up together. So it's a standard Kalman filter. It's like really like we have like one parameter, which is how important is each time scale. We have a continuum of time scales there. Overnight. Typical experiment, as experimentalist, you don't want to, you put the monkeys to the cage overnight. The next day at roughly the same time, you rerun the experiment.
Okay, but then isn't the process that's going on more related to how the brain learns during sleep then?
So this is a framing that I wanted to briefly highlight. The point that you just made is a process point. Now, like is it about something happening in the brain? The model that I have here is a normative model. It says what should happen, what would be the right way of doing generalization. I don't make a mechanistic point. This is sleep does it. Maybe sleep does it. Maybe time does it. It turns out that time also does it. We have different experiments for that. But it's basically, there's a mechanistic way of thinking about it and a normative way of thinking. This is like normative thinking. We're asking, how should we generalize? There is another question, which is, what is the mechanism of how we generalize? And I have bad news as a neuroscientist for that. We don't know much about it. We know which part of the brain. Now, if I take out your cerebellum, you don't do these kinds of things anymore. You don't adapt at all. But I can't tell you how the cerebellum does it. We have theories, lots of theories, but there's millions of neurons involved in, and I can record from 100 of them if I'm very lucky, because the cerebellum is very difficult. So we don't know how it does it. This one?
Is that a significant phenomenon that the plateau is off, or is that not?
Welcome to biology. There is random deviations. If you do it on another monkey, it doesn't have those properties so much. I should also say there's a lot that has been added to these frameworks since. There is also a cognitive component, where part of the adaptation is based on how you think about your specific situation. But again, that like reaches into the mechanism pieces. So there's a cognitive and a subcognitive component. In any case, here we have the model. I should say one more thing. We have this like weighted variance model, which does the best fit. What are the parameters of how your body changes? It's very hard to know that, because normally you adapt and also your body changes. Thankfully, Peter Thiel had models that don't adapt because they have brain lesions. And there you can read out how the body changes over time. And then you basically stick that into the model, and that leads to the best fits. Okay, here, I'm slow. The same kind of model also explains things like vocabulary learning. I should first say, these things are meta-learned. No, like that's why I'm kind of pushing into a learning direction. How can I know that they're meta-learned? We take a test that motor control people often did, a generalization test, where you do movements. And when you do a movement of 10 centimeters, we show you a movement of 13 centimeters. And it turns out that then over time, you kind of make smaller movements. And then I can ask, how do you generalize? What does that mean? I have you do straight movements, and then I have you do movements into different directions. And I'm asking, I do that very rarely, just as a test. I don't give you feedback at the end, so you can't learn anything from it. It turns out that people do global generalization. So if I make you move 30% less on a straight movement, you will also be basically 30% less on a movement into the opposite direction. People often said that is because the brain does something very special about scalings. And that was the theory in the field for a long period of time. And they believed it's something fundamental about brain mechanism. And this paper is one of the papers that really convinced me that thinking too much about brain mechanism is misleading. Because what we did is we said, well, maybe this is meta-learned by humans. What do I mean this is meta-learning? Do you see my cursor here? My mouse? I have a lot of experience with mice moving. All of you, everyone in this room has a lot of experience with mice moving. That's because that's what we do in our everyday life. So maybe it's not actually something fundamental, but it's something that like we learn from interacting with mice. Because it turns out that my computer is like a random gain. If I go to someone else's computer, your gain will be different from my gain. And we found in China a population of people who have never used a computer before in their entire life. It was a unique opportunity. And lo and behold, the people who never used a computer don't generalize like you or me. They generalize totally local. Undershoot movements like this affects movements that are basically the same, that share the same muscles, but not movement into other directions, because they've never seen like this weird thing of mice introducing random perturbations. So clearly it's a meta-learned thing, and we can show that because we take these non-computer users and we're just like, here's a computer, use it for 2 weeks. They come back 2 weeks later, they're just like you and me. They globally generalize things. And so what that means is here we have a generalization problem, and it's entirely meta-learned by human beings. And let's see, okay, cool. Now let me zoom out of this. Now, like what I said here is that generalization is complex, mirrors like the meaningful models that we should have about our body and arguably about the world, and that it's concrete evidence that it's meta-learned because if I give you a task that requires a certain generalization, you do generalize like the task requires it. And now let me zoom out a little more. Time. Now, I told you in the beginning, everything is about time. I have data up to some point of time. I prepare myself for the future. Depending on the horizon, certain variables become uncertain. Now, like you can say, tomorrow, my phone's going to be at a different place. Properties of my body are going to like change by tomorrow because, I don't know, I walk around or I walk too far. Also, but if I wait a little bit, like next week, my body's going to be significantly, meaningfully different. And you can say certain things like successful policies in adversarial situations might go away very, very quickly. As soon as you see me, you're going to adapt and like make life harder for me. So there's some things that become very uncertain very quickly. And there's certain things that remain stable for very long periods of time. And I'm arguing that because we always prepare ourselves for events that we don't yet know, that therefore, this is the stuff that we want to learn. That is the stuff that we want to generalize over long periods of time. This is the stuff that we want to generalize over very short periods of time. What are there? Causal powers, like stuff, if I push this button, it's going to advance to the next place. Great, it's a causal power. It's going to be helpful next time I give a talk here. And it's going to prevent me from like having to go to my keyboard. Causal powers are shared. The social structure of human society is shared. Like there's certain like opinion makers. I want to know who like makes the opinion and like get them to promote opinions that I think are useful for the world. Aspects of the space that we're in, like, yeah, they're stable for long periods of time. Physics, gravity is going to be like, for all that we know, it's going to be very similar in the future. Compositional structure of the universe, like humans have hands, birds have hands. All mammals have kind of the equivalent of hands. In fact, birds have hands. They just don't look like hands, they're wings. But once we realize this universal compositional structure, we can say a lot about it. And you can say also like evolution actually implicitly lets us know about certain truly important things that will happen. And so we prepare ourselves for this unknown future by learning about these things. And that, of course, has downstream effects. Now, curiosity, what should we be curious about? Well, the things that will be useful in the future, the things that we should be generalizing over. If there's something that I can generalize to the future, I should care about it. If I can't, then why do I invest time to like learn about it? Resource accumulation. Now, people are greedy. We all talk about how horrible it is that people are greedy, but like, guess what? Like accumulating lots of resources in a society like ours kind of gives us powers to solve certain problems in the future. And that's why we do it implicitly. So we can view resource accumulation as a way of generalizing policies to the future. Causal inference. Now, like we are really curious on how things work. That's why we're scientists. Now, like we are so wrongly curious about things that we basically spend our whole lives trying to figure out how things work. Why is that at least like somewhat like not a very bad idea? Well, the reason why it's not somewhat a bad idea is because the things that we figure out will generalize. They are the things that we should be using in the future. Affordances, compositionality. Now, like we're really interested in compositionality. People are so curious. I remember like when I went to school, they showed me how an eye worked. And it's like, kind of, I never forgot how an eye worked. It's like, I just filled in some extra details. Now, let's talk about, like we have like these two groups. Now we have people here who are like more like cognitive science more applied, and we have people like more on the math of generalization. And we look back to wonderful, beautiful results, like the history we learned about bias variance trade-offs, beautiful math and generalization. VC dimensionality, beautiful math and generalization, pack learning, beautiful minor distribution strip, beautiful math and generalization. But arguably, we are so excited about these because the math is so beautiful. I think, and this is what my rant is like finishing with, I think we need to dare doing the ugly things. Like, why did neural networks win? Now, 2005, we felt like the dark ages of neural networks were over. It was all about like maximum margin and machine learning stopped being ugly and became beautiful. And I remember being part of that. I went to neural information processing systems, thought it should be renamed kernel information processing systems, and thought the dark ages were finally over, and then came AlexNet. And why did AlexNet work so well? Was it more beautiful? Was it mathematically stronger? No, quite the opposite. It won because it solved the right problem. And I think it feels like in generalization, we're exactly in this 2010 situation. We have all these beautiful proofs, but in reality, I think generalization is not pretty, because generalization is about the properties of the world that connect the past with the future. And it's about a complex world that is relentlessly changing, but it's not just changing. It is changing in a very predictable way. And there's aspects that change a lot, aspects that change very little. The right solution is not pretty and probably doesn't have great proofs associated with it. Let's get over it. Let's build systems that actually generalize in the real world. I mean, like I love Gaussian intelligence. Gaussian intelligence is great. But I think we're in a space where there's so much structure, and I don't understand why kind of like we don't treat it as the problem that it actually is. And with that, thank you for listening to my rant, and I look forward to discussion. We have plenty of time. Briefly for the questions, I want you to there's something that I found incredibly useful when I moderate sessions, which is if you have a comment, show me your hand. If you want to follow up with what we currently discussed, show me 2 fingers, because I think it's more fun if people can react to one another. Questions?
Thank you for this talk. I wanted to ask you, the model that you are thinking about for generalization, is it similar to, you have one Markov decision process, you have another Markov decision process, and you want to see whether the past MDP and the future MDP, and you want to come up with a connection between the past MDP and future MDP in terms of the state space being similar, action space being similar, dynamics being similar. And so probably what you're pointing at is the right way to model generalization could be that the transition kernels are drifting for that MDP over time. And we want to make sure that our policy today with minor perturbations can be approximately optimal policies for the future. Is that similar? Did I get it right, or am I still far away?
This is one way of doing a first step into this place where you can say the past is an MDP, the future is an MDP. We look back at a history of MDPs that kept changing, and we assume that the generators for change at some level allow us to. Like in that sense, you can say we're implicitly believing that the change of the MDP itself is an IID function. Of course, that's also not true, but that would be one way how you could be starting there. There's a lot of different ways of there's a lot of ways of capturing dynamics of a given system. There's a lot of ways of formalizing kind of how the world is that we are there. There's a lot of ways of formalizing our role in it. Like you can say just formalizing as an MDP makes it hard to say to like ground out curiosity for it, because it's not enough to know that it's an MDP. I also need to know what I will want to do. And the goals that I have in future states are different to the goals that I have in past states. Yes.
I wanted to ask you to please elaborate a little bit more on the emphasis on the generalization to future. I remember your example about going to Philadelphia. Of course, it's going to be in future, but that's the only invariant that we have that the time goes on. Philadelphia yesterday, if you actually could go to Philadelphia yesterday, would have been the same as tomorrow. But I think what makes generalization in this case possible is that you know what are the dynamics of this stationary environment that is Philadelphia. It doesn't matter really a lot to me that it's in future or like it's in tomorrow, right?
Yeah, so you can say, how should we be thinking about it? You know, like the reason why I'm talking about the future is I care about my life. Tomorrow, or like at least on Monday, I'll be in Philadelphia. And therefore, if you want, like Monday, Philadelphia is the location where I am at. So I have to generalize to Philadelphia. That being said, now, like if I zoom out from your question, it's about the nature of structure. Now, like Philadelphia now is very related to Philadelphia tomorrow. The thing that like context switches between Berkeley and Philadelphia is that I will be moving myself to that place. So therefore, if you want, like certain invariances are location specific, and therefore it's my location changes that kind of make the distribution shifts happen ultimately. And so yes, yes, it has this complicated structure. Now you asked, why is time special? Like time is special because in my life, that's the only thing that exists. Now, like you can say space is context, and context is going to change. In fact, partially I choose what context I'm in. I choose that I'm flying back to there. But I think the framing for time is useful because of its generality. Now, like if I'm a company providing some service, time is there. Like I have a product. We all know that once you put a product into production, the quality decays over time. Thinking carefully about time will make the quality that the service decays, the speed with which the service decays slower. Yes.
So that view really implicates that prediction in really long-term future should not be possible. So if you have a stationarity, or if you've seen an environment that is very similar to the one that you're going to be 2 years from now, you'd be very good at predicting it. But seeing time as the pillar of generalization wouldn't really allow you to think of that, right?
Yeah, if you only look at that, you're definitely missing. You're definitely missing something. I'm not promoting to only look at that. We had Ben with a follow-up question there.
You answered it though. Can I change? You answered it. And I will also talk about your question. So.
Okay, cool.
But I had a question for you, but it's not for me. It's for some of the other graduate students in the room. So on your last slide, where you're probing, you want to poke the folks who are coming to the Simons Institute to think about ugly problems and think about just the inevitable ugliness of reality. Do you have small baby steps of things pipe dreams of theorems that you would like to see?
Yeah. So I think. I think the starting points are probably to focus on relatively short distances for generalization, where you could say a probability distribution will over short periods of time drift. Part of the drift will be predictable. Part of the variance accumulation will be predictable. So I believe that there's at least the early stages of that can be made mathematically beautiful. I think when it comes to we discussed also like relating to that question, there's context and there's time, and context and time have interesting properties. I do think that one could at least start with like relatively simple models that deal with the interplay between time and space. I believe that one can make models that focus, that are mathematically fully specified, that say deal with causal powers. I believe that, for example, you can derive important things about curiosity by kind of doing this like transition from short timescales to very long timescales. I believe that I in fact believe that in long distances, there's another like nice mathematical space. If I wait long enough, then only the things that kind of haven't been washed out until then become relevant. And those are again things that we can potentially meaningfully model and make statements about. Did I see your hand?
Well, I guess I'm afraid one of the things that came to my mind, which is it's a comment, not a is there's oh god damn it, Tversky and Kahneman. There's a book by Kahneman, which is Thinking Fast and Slow, and I remember in that book there is a marvelous example of attempted prediction, which ends up with correlation 0. and he makes the side remark that humans are very bad at predicting over any substantial period of time. And I think it's more in terms of what you're saying, in terms of any substantial change in context.
Yeah. I mean, like, look, at some level, humans often don't need to make those predictions well, where you can say, as long as I have the causal tools to deal with the realistic changes, I don't overly mind what those changes are. I don't need to be great at predicting them. If you give me the chance to roll out a control policy that undoes these changes that I'm not very great at modeling, then it is not overall that pragmatic.
Well, all right. The example specifically was actually something that mattered, which was trying to predict performance in officers of the Israeli army, as it turned out, after they had going through officer training school. And they had a little test for them. A bunch of people observed a candidate group doing the test. They all agreed on the rankings. And then they proceeded to make the rankings. But of course, not only the people whom they ranked highly were admitted, there was a bunch of people who were admitted. Then at some point, somebody said, oh, well, let's see how well our ranking correlates with the actual exit rankings. And the correlation was essentially 0.
I have a follow-up question by Ben.
Maybe a little bit more context on that Kahneman's first scheme. That particular prediction problem.
What?
I have more context on that particular
Oh, good.
Awesome.
Because
One of the dirty tricks that is, and it's a fault of a psychologist, Paul Meehl, and he warped our whole view of human psychology because of it, is the reason why people were bad at prediction was because it wasn't that they were necessarily bad, and actually the correlation wasn't 0. It was just less good than a statistical algorithm. But why is it less good than a statistical algorithm? It's because we agreed that the metric was statistics. When you compare the statistics of success rate, yes, people are worse than a statistical algorithm, but you've gamed against them. We are not computers. We're not statistical calculators. We're not actuaries. Those are not the kinds of things happening in our brains. So if you try to get people who have evolved to do all these weird things that Konrad showed, and you ask them solve an optimal risk minimization problem, we are suboptimal because the optimal thing is risk minimization. But you have rigged the game. And this is actually, if you look at all of Kahneman and Tversky's work, you rig the game such that the rational actor, the statistical algorithm can win. And all that work really tells us is we're not computers.
Well, we probably should talk about that.
We had another question.
okay.
Yeah, so it seems like you're emphasizing this aspect of meta learning, so the ability to kind of learn on the fly the rules of the world, and maybe like a worthwhile contrast is, other rules of the world that we're just born with, the ability to reason about, like geometric reasoning, which many animals can do. So for example, like size invariance, or ability to then, cope in novel environments, because I can sort of apply different geometric transformations to be able to do that, versus being put in a completely different position. And now I've never seen these rules before, and I need to now learn these rules. over again. And I guess maybe one question is, how much of that ability do you think is shared by other animals, as opposed to being uniquely human, that, like humans can walk in the laboratory and sort of pick onto what you're doing to them and so forth, whereas animals, it seems like, kind of fall apart oftentimes in that setting, just don't get it oftentimes. But yeah, anyways.
Yeah, so this is a great point. Now, like animals are often really good at generalization, despite the fact that maybe their lives are too short to like really meaningfully learn a meta-learning policy. The reason why I gave the talk I did is because this is mostly a room full of meta-learning, of machine learning people. From a machine learning perspective, the evolutionary component and the specific learning component are kind of one contiguous block. I do believe that a lot of generalization capabilities of animals, and to some meaningful level humans as well, are not something that is learned over lifetime, meta-learned over lifetimes, but that is maybe evolutionarily given. I think the literature isn't so clear yet to see what the things are that we are born with versus the things that we acquire. It's a big debate in significant parts of cognitive science where people disagree to which level we are basically born with certain kinds of knowledge versus to which level we learn to have that knowledge. I'm not qualified to take a strong stance there. In fact, Alison would probably have a much deeper background in that area. I thought we had Josh for a long time.
On the advice to young people train, right? I mean, so one thing you said is like, the world is ugly. And so your theorems are going to be hard. And so one thing you could do there is be like, let's just try to make, models of minimally ugly worlds, and then see what procedures work on those. And so I think that the OpenAI, back when it was open, as people like this know, OpenAI, back when they had a big interest in RL and these little robotic worlds and games, where they were very interested in this question of meta learning and perturbation. And so it's like, let's make a world where there is some degree of novelty, things change over time. You could look at small agents in those environments and try to figure out, like what procedures enable you to learn to be curious at the right times in ways that generalize. It's like one philosophy. And that would look very different from like attempting to mathematize, right, and describe, these environments in a way where you could sort of prove theorems. And then like the third thing you could do is just like look at LLMs trained on human conversations in which like exploration through clarification of what somebody is asking and then modification of that, like, there's a lot of data on how people adjust what they are saying to their interlocutors and sort of study, empirical things in that context. So those are like three very different kinds of projects. I'm curious for your thoughts on what you'd recommend.
Well, I think they're all wonderful projects. If you ask me what are the projects that will work, now, like let's say we want to make things work, then kind of wading into the ugly spaces is the only way to deal with it. The abstractions to the ugly spaces are, of course, the things that give us the chance to have clean proofs and so forth. I'm not ruling out that there can be some abstractions that give us a lot of mileage on how we should be thinking about real world problems. But I think the key then is to have the beauty and, like, if you want, multifacetedness of real worlds in the back of the mind, so that you can build theories that are at some level meaningfully pushing into that space. And I think like there's certain things that we can say about it, like multiple lines of coherence, where you can say there's coherence about me and my body, there's coherence about Philadelphia, as we had in the previous questions. There are multiple of those, and you can say we can at least push into spaces that have complexity, but that have complexity of a way that we can mathematically meaningfully describe. Like there's coherence in my life coming from the coherence of the city of Philadelphia. And I think in the same way as we made a lot of progress thinking about statistics by looking at mixture models, we can push for similar things when it comes to these models about generalization across time and space. We have a follow-up there.
Thank you. This is also to follow up the previous question, like kindly raised by Ben on like how to pin down this framework for something that's like more mathematical rigorous, more mathematically rigorous question that a graduate student can work on. As a graduate student, I wasn't sure I completely understood the answer. I wonder if suggesting like a new data to like for us to explore more structure in the data instead of working with the current simplified data model. Are you suggesting to like incorporate a time component into the current framework to look at generalization from like a short range time or long range time?
Yeah, I absolutely think that we could and should make models more usable and more meaningful to reality by at a minimum building in something interesting about time. And then there's kind of like the different ways of doing that. You can build in time and ignore the rest. You can build in time and add like certain structural components, like what do I know, like maybe the world is a mixture of cities or something. And if you want, it's a program that kind of step by step can add richness to the models about which we make statements. But when it comes to time, like there's a lot of temporal models where like that we have a very good mathematical handle on, that we could prove probably very similar theorems with.
Maybe one more question.
Thank you. So you talked a bit about, I guess, different levels of learning. So learning versus meta learning versus maybe learning a meta learning policy, because you could call that meta learning. And I'm wondering if these different levels potentially give you a way out of the ugliness. So the intuition I have is that kind of the lowest level of just learning very much seems like that needs some ugliness. You need to learn all the complicated statistical contingencies of your local environment. But I have the intuition that once you get to the higher levels, then it might actually be more beautiful, because the things that will transfer across scenarios or far into the future are these things you mentioned, like the laws of causality or the laws of physics. And these things do seem to permit more beautiful mathematical descriptions. So do you agree with that intuition, or do you think we kind of need to have ugliness all the way up?
I think like if you look at physics, like there are islands of beauty in a maelstrom of ugly. We're really good at describing gas. We are really good at talking about systems in the limit of t to infinity. We're like we're also really good at talking about systems to t is epsilon. Like there's all kinds of islands where we have like wonderful statements. And I believe, for example, for curiosity, you can say there are things that we can say that come from that scale transition, where you could say they exist a set of variables that basically decay. They decay to basically zero over any meaningful time scale. Therefore, they implicitly fall out of our model. Like I don't know where the ball will be, but I learned the policy with which I can juggle it. So it's at some level, I don't need to have the full ugliness of the world in which the balls lie somewhere, as long as I can kind of have curiosity about how I learn to juggle, and then a way of assembling the balls that I need to be impressing you with my juggling skills that are basically non-existent. I can barely do it with 3 of them. With that, this was a wonderful last question. Thanks everyone for your attention.
Thank you, Konrad. Okay, so we'll come back at 10:45 in an attempt to stay on time.